So I'm going to be talking about science, technology, engineering, and math. And as obviously we had some technology problems this morning. So for those of you not familiar with the tagline, although it's starting to come more of it in the public consciousness, but STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And so careers associated with STEM include everything from agricultural engineering to chemical engineering, biotechnology, pharmaceutical research and development, all these science-based careers. And what I'm going to be talking about today is really what we're experiencing in the next, as a nation in the next 10 years, that we're going to really see this growth in STEM employment. You're going to see a lot more jobs in STEM. And the issues facing STEM, especially when it comes to things like misconduct, fabricating results, falsifying data, plagiarizing ideas and words, and all these things really kind of play a role in this, how the public perceives us as scientists. So just currently, if you look at the STEM workforce, it's about 5% of all jobs that are out there. Okay. If you look at the growth that we've seen over the last 10 years, the growth in STEM jobs is about 8% compared to non-STEM jobs, which is about 2.6%. So really, you're seeing a great explosion in what we need for requirements to fill these jobs. So this is actually a study that was done at the U.S. Department of Commerce, and they asked, well, what about projected growth? And in fact, they find that the projected growth is going to be significantly greater. 17% growth by 2018 in STEM-related fields. Once again, engineering, biotechnology, other biological, life sciences, math-associated fields. So, and the U.S. government realizes this. Even as recently as Tuesday, there was the National Science competition in Washington, D.C. And the president came forth and said he's going to ask Congress for $80 million to educate over 100,000 teachers in STEM, to produce over 1 million graduates in STEM, to really kind of deal with this explosion in growth. So it's a tremendous amount of growth. So we're seeing projected growth. And when they actually looked at wages for STEM, the wages were significantly higher, 26% higher wages in STEM versus non-STEM workers. So you think about a student in this economy, and they want to go to school, and they want to get an education, and they want to make sure that they come out and get a job, and get a good paying job. So STEM is looking like it would be one of the fields that would be a lot more attractive to a student that's coming into the workforce. So, but you have to think about how this all plays in. All of this money, the $80 million that's going into into going to STEM programs, is taxpayer money. And so what we're seeing also, along with this growth, is also an increase in misconduct cases. Cases where we see fabricating results, stealing ideas, and so forth. And so as you start seeing more of these high-profile cases, the public trust in science starts to erode. And so this is really something that is kind of threatening this growth in STEM, especially here in the U.S. And so I just want to highlight some of the key cases that have happened recently and how misconduct does work at really kind of betraying this public trust. So one of the biggest misconduct cases happened about in 2005. There was a prominent Korean scientist named Woo-suk Wong, and he was responsible for cloning the dog. So in 2005, he published a series of papers in Science that said that he in fact not only tried to clone a human, but actually was successful. And all of a sudden, this Korean scientist, who was very popular in Korea, but the rest of the world didn't know him, kind of rose to international attention. It was approximately about a year later that a whistleblower came forward and said we need to reassess what's going on and really look at the study and ask, well, was it really done with integrity? And after a long investigation, not only was data falsified, so here's an example, actually a published figure where they actually, it's not showing up. Vertically, there are different panels showing different cell lines, and they're supposed to be basically showing that different cell lines have very similar characteristics. So they showed basically that they were able to establish different human clones. But when you actually blew up the contrast, you can see that the image is duplicated. So it really showed you that there was some problem. This was actually published. So it tells you that there was a problem in the peer review process. The peer reviewers that looked at this, there was a problem. They went on to find out that that data was fabricated, it was falsified. There was a conflict of interest because many of the people in the lab had financial interest involved in this, and there was also some bioethical issues because the embryos that they took were from people who didn't know that the studies were going toward this. So the number of violations that happened really kind of caused an international uproar. And so it really kind of, and these were items that were not just in journals like Science and Nature, but was on the evening news. So really, this kind of came to the forefront of the public attention. Another misconduct case came last year, and this is a immunologist at MIT. And he essentially, he's an associate professor. He essentially fabricated and falsified information so that he can get grants and publish materials. And it really showed that here's this prominent U.S. scientist. Misconduct isn't something that kind of happens in small places. Here's a prominent scientist, and he basically was fired from his position at MIT. So once again, this kind of erodes that public trust. So do we have proof that these type of things erode public trust? And it really kind of hits home. There was a joint poll done by Nature and Scientific American about how people feel about recommendations given by scientists. So back in 2009, do you remember there was this H1N1 pandemic that hit? So the World Health Organization basically said in 2009 to countries, you need to buy vaccines, stockpile it, and give it to your citizens and vaccinate them. So luckily, the pandemic ended up being much more mild than we expected it to. But in 2010, it came out that the senior scientists that actually did this recommendation had direct linkages to the pharmaceutical companies that actually sold the vaccines. And so the amount of money that was generated by these pharmaceutical firms producing these vaccines were tremendous. And really the problem was in Europe, and it really came into this public light in Europe. And so Nature and Scientific American did this poll and asked Americans and Europeans, how do you feel about scientist recommendations for these type of things? And in the US, really about 70% have said, well, you know what, we do believe our scientists. But in Europe, it was about 30%. So that's a huge erosion of public trust. So when you're thinking about, you have this huge growth in STEM jobs, and you have all this public funds going into really training students, and then you have things like this, the public's going to say, wait, I don't want my money to go there. So there is a big threat that's going to be happening. So the US government recognized, okay, this is an issue. So they've done multiple pronged approaches to really kind of combat misconduct. The first was they established a Office of Research Integrity, and this is really to really kind of combat research misconduct that's funded through the NIH. And if you go to their websites, it's undergone a revamping. You can find all the misconduct cases there, whether they've been dismissed or what the punishments were. You can find resources about how to train students, how to establish policies at your own institutions, resources on plagiarism, all sorts of different resources. So it's a great website. They also mandated, as of December 2011, so 2 months ago, that every federal agency associated with science, USDA, EPA, National Science Foundation, NASA, must have misconduct policies. So this really means protection for whistleblowers. how the procedures and how the agencies handle misconduct. And this is really important because if I'm a scientist and I know that there are established policies in place, if I'm thinking about doing misconduct, there's at least I know there's some accountability. I'm going to have to, there's a procedure for it, as opposed to just not having anything at all. So this has been established as of 2011. And then as Elizabeth pointed out, both the NIH and NSF has mandated that all trainees that receive funds through these agencies must receive training in the responsible conduct of research. So say if I have a grant and it's funded through the NSF, and I have a postdoc, a graduate student, and maybe one undergraduate researcher, those 3 people who are funded through my grant must take this course about responsible conduct of research, which is great. So my own experiences, I was lucky enough to get an NSF or NIH fellowship when I was a postdoc. And so I had to take this course. And you know, when I originally went into it, I'm like, oh, it's a 1-credit course. I just want to do my research. And I kind of went into it kind of with maybe an apathetic attitude. But after taking the course, I realized it was transformative. It made me look at how I collect data. It made me look at how I view other people's work. Do I let things slide by if I have an, oh, you know what, that guy's a nice person. You know, I see something that doesn't seem right, I'll just let it go. That's not part of the scientific process. And it really transformed the way I viewed science, which is great. Then I was sad because I had done 2 years of undergraduate research, I had done a graduate work, and I was in the middle of my postdoc. Span of 10 years where I wasn't aware. And so then, of course, I started stressing, well, did I, you know, was there something I missed? You know, and there's this big lag. And so it's almost like at the postdoc level, it's too late. You need to start these students much earlier and telling them, you know, you're going to need these tools to really go out in the workforce and use that while you're actually producing your science. So it makes you wonder, well, who's, you know, if all the research, the RCR training or the responsible conduct of research training happens at the graduate level, are the jobs that are out there that we're talking about really at the graduate level or higher? And really that's not the case. So what percent, are those with graduate degrees making up most of STEM workforce? And in fact, that's not the case. Okay, and so it's a little hard to read, but ignore the orange bars, really the multi-colored bars. You can see that graduate degrees, those with graduate degrees really make up a quarter of the workforce. But the bulk of the degrees really come from those with bachelor degrees. And so if these students are not receiving training and going out to the workforce, potentially that they may not have a very clear idea what misconduct is. Okay? So this is as of 2010. So there was another, there was a study that was done by Georgetown University that really looked at STEM degrees and projected what it would look like. And so will the need for graduate degrees go up in 10 years? And in this case, no. At the end of the day, the bulk of the workforce is going to be taken by those who have undergraduate degrees. Okay. So it really kind of underscores this need for training our students at the undergraduate level that you need to conduct your future work with a code of integrity. So 2/3 of STEM workers will have gone through some type of college training once they go into the workforce. And when I say college, undergraduate or associate degree. So, so what about the majority of undergraduate students in STEM? Okay. So when they go out into the workforce, what type of tools do they need? Well, they need to be able to work with others. They need to be able to collect and analyze data. They need to write reports and present their reports, and they need to conduct their work with integrity. Okay? So at undergraduate institutions, we should basically provide experiences for collaborative work, teach methodologies how to collect and analyze data, offer multiple opportunities to present their work, and then train students how to conduct their work responsibly. So this is really what we need to do. So how do undergraduates receive this training? Okay, and really, when you look at STEM education at the college level, it's really through traditional classroom courses and laboratory courses. Okay, so where do they find this training? You'll get experience in collaborative work both through the lab, mostly in the lab, but you'll get it in the classroom too. You work in discussion groups, you work writing, researching a topic or so forth. Teaching proper methodologies in collecting data. Once again, obviously in the laboratory, if you think about physics, chemistry, biology, they all have laboratory-associated courses. So a lot of that's going to happen in the laboratory. When I teach biology, I also integrate those type of methodologies in how to take data and analyze it in the course room. So it's possible, and that's why I have them in a little lighter color, that you can get this from the course, the traditional classroom. Once again, writing and presentation, this can happen both in the laboratory and in the classroom. But to train students to actually work responsibly, that is where that gray area comes into. And so I want to talk about possibly a two-pronged approach that will help provide this training as the students go along in their education. So one thing that I've done, and Elizabeth's touched at, is at UW-Milwaukee I developed this online module about training students in responsible conduct of research. But there's a problem. When the NSF and NIH mandated that these responsible conduct of research courses must be taken, they were very specific, indicating that they must be discussion-based. If you've ever taken an online FERPA training, or you take an IRB training, hour or two, you click through it, and you're done. And you think about it for that 1 or 2 hours, and then you kind of go on. And so while this module we established was, it gave access and it gave a means to actually provide that information, it's not enough. It's not discussion-based. It's very one-directed. And so, a lot of programs have integrated into their curriculum bioethics or ethics, one course on ethics in engineering or ethics in chemistry. But what else can be done? And really two things I want to talk about is this idea of integrating scientific integrity training within the curriculum, and have it come both in the laboratory courses and the classroom courses throughout the curriculum. Okay, not just in one course, but every course that's taught, have some basis in touching on it. Okay, and then once again, and I think also Elizabeth touched on this, is establishing these policies, and also the dean also touched on this about establishing policies that really relate to integrity. So I just want to talk about laboratory courses. This is probably one of the easiest ways to integrate how to do training. Students in science lab courses have to collect data. They have to work together. They have to write up reports. And so when they do this, you'll talk to a lot of students, and I tend to talk to these students that are taking it, especially if I'm not teaching the class. Oh, how do you feel? Oh, I just, I got an A in it, and it was okay, and it was. A lot of times the attitudes of the students are just to get the report out, and they never think about this course is training for future work, that what they're gaining in the course is how to collect data. They're more concerned about the A on the final report as opposed to getting in front of the equipment or the experiment and collecting that data, recording it properly, and submitting a report that's truly reflective of what they actually collected. A lot of times in these lab classes, experiments don't work. So what do? They either make it up, the results, or they go get it from their friend. And we need to teach our students that this really, in the workforce, you can't do that. And these are easy things to actually integrate into the curriculum. You'll find kids will work together, and maybe they're not supposed to, or they'll take a source. Oh, you know what? I saw this experiment was done online. I'll just copy down what the results are from online. That, once again, you can't do that in the workforce. And really stressing that in the laboratories courses is really important. Authorship. This is really one of those things that we don't really talk about. A lot of times you'll have that one strong student, and then you'll have all the other ones that are basically just saying, oh yeah, okay, okay, what are you saying? And they'll write it down. And really the true author of that report is that one student, and the other ones are kind of going for the ride. And really talking about how authorship is assigned and how it's actually designated in the lab setting. So obviously these things I'm talking about are very tightly tied to academic integrity. You had a question?
I was in science labs all the time. I think this is wonderful, but you would have to actually change the way that you grade. Because at least how it was done before, you're graded on if it's right or wrong.
Well,
and if your experiment fails, you're like, I know it's not right. I need to get who
well,
got it right.
Well, and I'll tell you, and this is one of the things that a lot of students, when they go through undergraduate and they get into research, they don't realize that 90% of the experiments don't work anyways. And this is one of the things we need to tell students, especially if we're training them in biotechnology. And we're trying to do this more and more, especially at Marquette, where we're giving these higher level courses. We'll give them problems where there is no answer. We don't know the answer. They're actually doing the research in the lab class. And so making sure that students know it's okay if the experiment doesn't work, but what's not okay is to be okay with it. You know, you really have to figure out why did the experiment not work, and that's what the grade should be based on. Well, obviously the reason why it didn't work is I left it in incubating too long, and that's actually what you need for training in STEM fields these days, is not the answer, but how to get to the answer. Yeah, it's starting to change, especially when you're talking about biotechnology. I can't talk about chemistry and physics so much, especially because the labs are they've been doing a lot of the same experiments for years and years. But I know for biotech, we have them, here's a gene. You figure out the exon structure of the gene. And they have to do that. And so if it doesn't work, as long as their data points to the reason why it didn't work, or why the answer is, it makes sense. So it's really kind of focusing more not on the result, but data-driven results. Okay. So this is actually in the lab process. So it's probably the easiest way to actually address this. In the lecture, it becomes a little bit harder. Okay. And so at Marquette, introductory biology, there's about 750 students. It's taught by 3 biology faculty. And the majors range from biological sciences, biomedical engineering, health sciences, and you'll even get nursing students, you'll get some business students, psychology students that actually take this course. And the objectives of the course are very basic. Probably many courses demonstrate major concepts, demonstrate analytical skills through coursework and writing. So we actually integrate a writing component with these 750 students. And we also stress the how to design experiments and what the whole idea of scientific method during the course. And so while we teach this course, we also integrate things about research integrity. So one of the things I do with the 250 students is I buy 250 bags of M&Ms, and I give one to each student. I have them break it open, and we talk about data. And the whole purpose of exercise is how to handle large amounts of data and how to visualize it and get the message to the students or the reader as quick as they can and as concisely as they can. So they rip it open. They have these clickers, and I first ask them, what's their favorite color, M&M color, and they vote on that. And then as a class, we decide, well, let's try to just figure out the percentage of blue M&Ms in a pack. And we compare it to published values. So I have them come up with a hypothesis of, do they think that what they're going to get as a class is going to be very similar to what the published values are. And so we talk about that, and we talk about how to design the experiment. But during the course of the experiment, I lay seeds. And so all of a sudden I start talking to them. I say, green is my favorite color. I start talking about things that I would say to bias them. And their goal is to actually identify, well, what is bias? Is it really having an effect? And how that really actually relates to when you perform an experiment, will that affect the results? And so we talk about that. We also talk about, what happens if the guy over in the corner starts eating his M&Ms, right? Does that change the data set? Yeah, it does. It changes the data set. And if you throw out data, how that affects your interpretation. So these type of things, it's 250 students, but you can integrate it in, and it doesn't have to be 3 full lectures. You just slip it in here and there, and it really does have an effect. We also do something called calibrated peer review, where we have all 750 students in all the 3 classes write multiple essays. Okay, so there's 2 or 3 assignments. And we talk about the need for the scientific process of having peer review and how science is quality controlled. And students hate it because they suddenly say, wait, you're not grading my work? My friend is grading my work? And what it does, it's not so much the writing, but them to actually look at someone else's work and actually think about what that means and assign value to it. And those type of things we talk about. We also, linked to that is we have all 750 students turn in their assignments to turn it in. Okay, and so I'm sure many of you have heard of these plagiarism checkers. And over the course of the 10 years that these have been in place, there's this kind of unwritten rule that you can't plagiarize in Bio 1 because they will catch you. The incidence of plagiarism was much higher maybe 5 years ago than it is now. Right now, if I do see plagiarism, it'll be like one line from the textbook, and I'll see it repeatedly in multiple essays. And so if that's the case, I will email the student and say, this is a verbal warning, make sure you don't do it in future assignments. Occasionally, I will get something like this. So this was actually from last semester. You can see everything that's highlighted is actually plagiarized, either from another student or from an actual source. And so the stuff in blue is actually taken from press releases. The stuff in red is actually taken from another student. And what the two students did is they worked together, and then they flipped around words. So they thought that we wouldn't catch it. Well, of course we caught it. And so at Marquette, what we do is we bring the students into our office. We always have a second person around, a second faculty member, and talk to them about the incident. And then at that point, we actually write up a report that goes to the college. I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences, and that letter is actually sealed in a sealed envelope and put in their file. That letter will not be opened up unless they have a second offense. If they don't have a second offense, they'll basically be thrown out at graduation. And so saying this in front of the student that you're going to get a letter in your permanent file really hits home. And we rarely see second offenders on this. So these are just things that we're doing at Marquette to kind of help establish this kind of culture of academic integrity.
Could you go back and talk a little bit more about the collaborative?
Sure.
I know there are a couple people here at Stout engaging in this, but I don't know if others are familiar with it.
Yeah, so calibrated peer review, we ask the students to write on a topic, and we give them some guiding questions. So last semester I had my students write on ocean acidification, how increased levels of carbon dioxide in the oceans actually lead to decrease in shell life. The shells of marine animals end up becoming compromised. And so they have to write an essay on this, and they have to give supporting evidence, they have to give citations, they have to give arguments, and obviously we give them guiding questions to kind of focus them on how they're going to write this essay. And once they write the essay, they submit it, and then the computer program, which is through UCLA, and I have it up there, it basically assigns the student 3 peers that will review that article. And they have certain guidelines that they have to look for. Did the author have a hypothesis or an argument? Did they define what ocean acidification, very basic questions, and they rate it on that. And they go from very basic questions to much more complicated questions. And so the students have these rating systems that they have to rate their peers on. And then that goes into this logarithm that this website uses, and it generates a grade. And the grade is based on first how the student did on their peer reviews, so how their peers graded them, how they graded themselves on their own essay, and then they also get graded on how well they are as a peer reviewer. So if they gave people a 7 and all their peers gave them a 7, that means that they were a good peer reviewer, versus if they gave someone a 10 and everyone else gave them 2 and 3, that would actually say that they're a bad peer reviewer. And so that all goes into the grade. Okay. So once again, these things are very related to scientific or academic integrity that we're dealing with. Plagiarism, stealing ideas and things like that, and cheating. So, what do we already know about academic integrity at universities? And there's a number of schools that really have looked at surveys of their students and faculty and asked, well, what do we think it is? And so one of the, so John McCabe, those of you in ethics usually know this. This is a faculty at Rutgers in global management who has really focused his work on academic integrity. And he's established a survey that a lot of universities are using to assess how faculty and students feel about academic integrity. And so almost 75% of students claim that they've cheated at one point, and when they actually broke it down, it looked like the bulk of it was plagiarism. Faculty believe that academic dishonesty occurs more than students. So faculty obviously think it's a bigger problem than students do. But this is what's kind of hard to deal with, is that almost half the faculty said they've ignored academic dishonesty. And so they broke it down in this survey, and they said, obviously, lack of evidence is, if you hear about someone cheating or something, sometimes, a lot of times, or you have a feeling, gosh, I'm not sure, but I feel like that kid is cheating. You usually don't pursue it if you don't have enough proof. And obviously, if it's trivial, if they are, and the trivial comes down to a fine line. If, I mentioned in the calibrated peer review, when they put it in to turn it in, if they had one line, do you really pursue it? What we do here is we just give them a verbal warning at Marquette. But a lot of faculty will just ignore it. What's even maybe a little bit harder to swallow are the other things. I didn't want to deal with it. The system is too bureaucratic. There's maybe not policies in place. There's the one that I actually worry about is the student is the one who will ultimately suffer. And when I think about this, I think about that MIT associate professor. If he had a teacher early on that said, this is unacceptable, would he have gotten to that point? Okay. And so that's one of the things that I worry about. Lack of support from the administration, not having established policies, or those are things that go into it, and not enough time. And I'm a faculty member. I know how hard it is to take the time out to actually talk to the student and pursue these things. So those are things that faculty also mentioned. When they ask students, well, how do you know about policies? All they really talk about is, well, it's in the syllabus. That's where they found it. Okay. When it comes to fabrication and falsification, this is really something that's very directed towards STEM. Even though faculty know that it's important, they don't really consider fabrication, falsification an offense. Okay, or they don't think it's really relevant at the undergraduate level. And once again, when you're training future scientists, we need to let them know that this is unacceptable. So Don McCabe actually went on and gave a series of recommendations how you can promote institutional academic integrity. And he said really the number one thing is the faculty factor. Students learn the most about integrity, whether it's scientific or academic, from faculty. Okay? A lot of times it's these informal one-on-one discussions. Either it's integrated into the curriculum, or it's one of those things that the kid gets caught and the faculty actually makes a point of it. Also, the faculty are the ones that can control it too, because if they're not the ones that actually, if they catch a student that's engaging in misconduct, if they don't catch them on it, then there's obviously no reason why the student should worry. They might as well, if there's no ramifications, if I cheat, it's not a big deal. Okay. Once again, it's really important to confront the cheating student. It will help the student in the long run. And if you do see academic dishonesty, you must respond, and it should be quick, okay? So that the students know if they're caught, immediately there's a response, okay? And this is one thing also I think Elizabeth touched on, is that we need to integrate students into these policies so that they also have a voice, and they also have, they know that these policies have been developed not just from faculty from a top-down approach, but from also a bottom-up approach, okay? And once again, clarifying expectations. And this is really making sure students know these are the procedures, this is what we know, this is what's going to happen if I do engage. It really needs to be very clear, okay? So these are kind of like the two-prong approach that we can actually do for STEM, especially to see if we can actually get a culture of academic integrity and scientific integrity. And I just want to point out some of the resources, and I'll give this presentation to Elizabeth. Two of the resources I want to talk about is really just about the state of STEM right now. There's a fantastic report done by Georgetown called STEM, and it really just talks about the workforce and what the workforce is going to need in the future. And then the second is which one is it? It is the Good Jobs Now the Department of Commerce, and it really talks about, once again, how the government's approach to STEM and how it's going to be taken. So with that, I can entertain any comments or questions or things like that.
Do you have a unified statement that all faculty, all courses, all departments use?
No. No, it's going to be different from college to college. It's really dictated at the college level. So it's going to be the dean's office that really kind of says, well, you need to do this. But there is a requirement that academic honesty statements must be in every syllabus and how it's handled. So there is that type of policy. But the way how it is across the board is really very variant between college and college. So I know definitely between the School of Business and Arts and Sciences, it's much different how they handle it. So in Arts and Sciences, we have this system where the students know that if they do engage in misconduct, they'll get the sealed letter. The second time around, they'll open it, and it's up to the dean to actually talk about what the punishments are.
Have you followed the Mark Hauser case?
No, I haven't.
It's the examples you gave early on were very good examples. The case of Mark Hauser might be, I'm sure, will be of great interest to you. So it's not in, when we think of STEM, people immediately think of things like chemistry and physics and so on. Some
Right.
people don't always think of psychology.
Right.
But in this case, we're talking about a psychologist just in the last year or so who's working at Harvard, so at the very top of the academic heap, and he has since been forced to resign from there because some of his data was found to be, depending how you looked at it, fabricated, highly biased, so on and so forth. And two really interesting aspects about this case that would be pertinent to some of what you're telling us about is one, in an irony, one of his main legacies is that he did research on morality. So there's that, and but the other thing that's even more salient to this is, if I have my facts straight on it, the issues first came to light when students in his lab reported to others and said things aren't right here. We're coding the data and we're saying it looks like this, and then he's coming in and saying, no, do it again, and basically do it till it comes out like this. So it's resulted in numerous paper retractions. It's resulted in him losing his position. It was a very interesting case, and a very recent one.
Wow. And so actually, this is one I always leave out psychology, but that is actually one of the largest facets of what NSF considers a STEM discipline. It is probably larger than biology, if not probably equally as large as biological sciences is a STEM field. So, someone else had a comment?
Do you see more plagiarism in or cheating of their scores outside of students' majors? So
No, this is actually a question that we always talk about. Is if it's not in the major, is a student, if I'm a biology student and I'm taking a philosophy course, will I plagiarize more in the philosophy course? And I don't know firsthand, but I know reading the data out there and reading a lot of surveys, that is the case. That students say, well, you know what, I really don't, I'm just taking it for the credit, I need it for graduation. It doesn't really apply to me, I might as well just plagiarize it. I have other things to do. And firsthand, like I said, I don't see that because I do mostly majors courses, but there is definitely evidence out there that that is the case. And I'm not sure how to combat that. And that's a cultural thing that really needs to be addressed, and it's not an easy thing to address.
The fact that 75% of students, or I can't remember the exact number, but are really engaging in some kind of academic misconduct, to me it sounds like when you see numbers that high, and it might even be low because it's a self-report number, that there's a systems problem versus a bad apple problem. And so you're sort of addressing some of the issues as far as things like turning it in, the calibrated peer review, but Can you speak to that at all?
A cultural issue. Is that kind of, yeah, and that is the issue. And how do you establish a culture that will engage in academic honesty? And how do you do that? And you know, what we do, at least in biology, is really kind of start with the freshmen and say, you know what, this is unacceptable with the freshmen. The minute, and they come in just so bright-eyed and they're not tainted at that point, and so we say, this is how we do it at Marquette. And so by establishing that groundwork, hopefully by the time they get to their senior year, it would have been better if we didn't lay that groundwork at all. But like I said, it's not a black and white issue. I'm not sure how to really deal with establishing a true culture of an academically honest student body. And if we had more students like this, we'd be in great hands. So,
how much we discussed this? How much of this do you see as the ignorance on the student's part versus intentional plagiarism or cheating? In other words, they don't truly understand citations correctly, or
I think that is some of it, especially at the freshman level. I mean, when we deal with the students at the freshman level versus in my upper level neurobiology class, there is that understanding or that baseline that they just have to get up to speed, and there is a lot of that, not understanding that. Intentional, I don't know. I think it's a lot greater. I think a lot of it comes down to students rush for time. They have other activities, you know, they're overcommitted. They have to work. They have to do all these other things. And so, you know what? If I could just plagiarize it, or if I could just take it from somewhere else, that would save me up 2 hours. I can actually, you know, go out with friends, or I can actually focus on this other exam, which I have the next day. You know, and so that tends to be, a lot of it is just time commitment. These are all hypotheses. I'm not really sure.
I'll just add a quick comment. I lectured this past week for two different groups, the freshmen and sophomore students in STEM college, and then the juniors and seniors. And I did an exercise where I had everybody close their eyes and put their heads down, and I said, who's engaged in academic misconduct? And you know, the freshmen and sophomores, it was roughly 50%. And then my second question was, who's not sure if you've engaged? And there were many more hands that went up. The opposite occurred with the older students, where the majority said, yes, I have. So they know they've done it at that point in time, and then not being unsure went down. So I think they, you know, which in my thinking, it's actually a positive, because there is some sense of their moral awareness, right, if you will. I mean, I'm trying to look at it optimistically, that at least they knew what they were doing. So whether or not how we combat it, but there definitely was a fundamental difference in age and where they are academically.
We have a couple of questions.
I was just going to comment on that, because we're the office that deals with academic misconduct when it happens, and so over time, I think I've seen exactly what's been talked about here, is that some of the freshmen, they might have some idea they maybe should be doing things a little bit different in terms of citations. However, they don't really often know how to do that properly. And they've been cutting and pasting for a long time, well, their whole life, this generation, essentially. But then when you get to the older students, what they often tell us is, yeah, I knew, but I was willing to take the risk. I was under a time constraint. I was feeling pressured. Exactly what you said. I was feeling pressured, and in their minds, this is really interesting to me, a lot of times they say, you know, it doesn't really resonate with me that it's cheating unless I get caught.
Right. No, I think this is exactly the point.
You know, so.
Yeah. And so, it's worth it if I can
step
under.
It's worked up until I'm a junior now. It's worked so far, but now, you know, if I get caught, and then they're beside themselves.
Right. And so, we take the attitude, at least in this biology introductory course, is that we need to be hardline from the beginning, so that they know, okay, you know what, there's a no tolerance policy.
I would like to just comment on the intentional versus accidental, or I didn't know I was cheating.
Unconscious cheating.
Unconscious. I don't know that I actually heard it said, but I don't I'm having a little trouble phrasing that comment here. I see it all. I teach writing.
I know. And you're
I
gonna see
didn't
it.
mean to. I just forgot the quotation marks.
I see that a lot. Oh, I meant to put it in. I must have forgotten.
Right. And my attitude is, and my syllabus says, intentional or otherwise, if you accidentally cheat, the consequences are the same.
Right.
And
And
I understand that maybe they do have some trouble understanding that those little quotation marks mean the difference between a passing grade and a failing grade.
Well, and I always tell the students, if you do it in a class, you're dealing with me. I will understand that you're doing this, and I'll tell you it's wrong. If I do it as a faculty member, I will lose my job. And that's the one thing you have to realize as a student, is that this will have consequences later, whether it's unintentional or not. And that does, at least especially with the freshmen, it does resonate.
Well, and I think it's very important. And like I said, I understand that they may not know or they may not fully understand how to, right? But
Right.
I think at that point, it's a student's responsibility. If they don't get it, if they don't get how to do the math problem, they don't get it right.
Right.
If they get how to cite the
That's
source.
true.
You know, I hate to see, or I hate to think that, you know, we're gonna say, well, if you didn't mean to, then, you know, we'll cut you some slack this time. You mentioned that hard line from the beginning, and I think it's very important to, and I've had this student, oh, my grandfather died, and this dog had to go to the vet, and, you know, I'm really sorry about that. And then they say, well, can I do it again? No, you can't do it again.
Right.
And I agree with your hardline approach, and I think that in addition to, you know, making them accept the consequences, we have to make them understand their responsibilities from the get-go, no matter where they've come from, what they've gotten away with in the past. Thank you for listening.
I think there was one in one.
Because I've been using Turnitin for a long time, and my approach I've gone back and forth over the years, and then last semester, another unique situation. And so kind of what I see now is intentional, but with good intentions, if that makes sense. That what a student said to me last time, and she was upset the whole semester, she was one student I was never able to really reach, but most I can reach in that they come in and say, you tell us we have to take notes, we have to upload our notes to the Dropbox, but if I don't get it right, then I don't get credit for it. And she was like, I did all the reading. If I don't copy exactly what they're saying and I get it wrong, you know, I don't get the points for it. So we had a long talk. I do let students then redo it. I don't broadcast that then, because then a lot of students do a crappy job the first time, thinking that it just doubles my grading load. But for the students that I call in and have, you know, this very sincere, they have to do a different assignment. They can't do the same one. So it doubles their work rather, and that they, and I'm on the panel, so I'll talk more about this later, but I do a bunch of things during the first 2 weeks where they get credit for their original ideas to really drive home the point. And this idea of dealing with wrong answers now is really intriguing to me. How can they explain what's wrong with the answer? Right. So if they're using original ideas, but it's just plain wrong, you know, how can we deal with that? But the idea that their original thoughts, which is what they're going to want to show on the job, right?
Well, this is, especially in STEM, it's all about critical thinking. And so students get so upset with me because I'm like, you know what, you got to think. You can't regurgitate. You have to think about what that means.
So I do a lot of work about that there's more than one right answer, and maybe for math, more than one right way to get to the correct answer. The other thing I wanted to mention is I have a friend who teaches at St. Olaf, and I almost fell off the floor when she told me this, but for their midterms and final exams, no one but the students can be in the room. No professors in the room. They have an honesty policy. They have to write it out on the cover of their blue book. So I guess that's the other thing. They have smaller classes, and it's all blue book essay exams, and they pay a lot of money. So I see some factors in there. I'm not sure how they all fit in, but they have to write out the honesty policy and sign it. And lo and behold, people, I think because they put so much in to their midterm and final essays that they write, she told me that they do report on one another when they think someone's looking at their hand, looking at some answers or an outline.
Wow.
They
Well,
give that
I'll
feedback.
comment that high.
But I couldn't. I was like, really? You hand out the exam and you have to leave the room?
I will comment that high education cost and tuition do not equal a academically
Yeah,
honest
I-
student at Marquette. That's not the case all the time. Oh, there's also someone over here.
Well, I was just going to have a question for Joan. From your office, I mean, I've had multiple cases in my years here of academic misconduct, and some of them have come up to your office, some of them haven't. But when do you really want to see it? I mean, if we all have a real hardline attitude to this and start sending a lot of stuff up to you, at what point are you going to say, wait, I
Well,
can't handle all this?
and
If
it's
75% are doing it.
Yeah, and it's really not my determination. It's determined by the UW System Administrative Code has very clear guidelines for when things come to our office, and I am fully aware that a lot of things do not. But anytime a student is sanctioned, especially if it has to do with a failing grade in the class, a failing grade in the assignment, we have suspended students, and in one case expelled a student from the university for misconduct. Those things have to provide student due process. They have an opportunity to be heard, and those things are to come to our office. Very, very seldom, and so really all it involves is you filling out sort of a template and forwarding it to us. Very seldom does it go to hearing, because when people, faculty find misconduct, the evidence is pretty strong typically, and so there, it ends there. What happens is it gives the student due process rights, and it does become part of a file. Especially if you do a verbal warning, or you give them the opportunity to do something over, those sanctions don't require the same level of follow-up. That wouldn't become something in their file in our office. However, you always have to give them the opportunity to contest either the fact that it occurred or the sanction. So, we see a lot of activity at midterms and final times. That's when we hear mostly from faculty. But, we don't determine when it should come to our office, or the UW System Administrative Code determines that. So, and I think it's, that's followed to different degrees on campus. But our job is to support the faculty in implementing their decision.
I do a couple of things in my classes that I think relate to some of what we're talking about, and they're not really my original ideas or things I borrowed from other people and so on. And some of you are probably doing these things. But earlier the issue came up about intentional versus unintentional, or to what degree the student justifies it or thinks that it's the right move to get the result versus. Anyway, one of the things I do is on the first day of my in-person classes is when we're going through the syllabus, I take a couple of minutes, I change my tone of voice, I get their attention, and I note that research indicates that people cheat when they are in difficult situations. That somebody died, these things are piling up, I have to work overtime and so on, and that it's more situational than, this is a dishonest person at their core. So I try to tell them that, and then I say, if you find yourself this semester in a position you didn't expect to be in, or you're under much more pressure than you expected, such that, it enters your mind that maybe I'll take this shortcut, I ask them to remember this and to stop themselves at that point, and instead of cheating, to contact me. And then I get a laugh because I say, you don't have to tell me you were thinking of cheating, but do get in touch with me and say, I'm in a really bad situation. Is there anything that we can do? And I tell them, I'll try to help you find an ethical solution to the problem, whatever, the longer deadline, whatever that is. So to try to emphasize to them that, anyone can get into a bad situation, and that it's much better to take the ethical course than to take a shortcut. And then also related to the syllabus, and the last page of my syllabus is a signature form. I actually require the students to sign that they have read and understood the syllabus and gotten any questions they had answered, such that they're making a commitment to say, yes, I get all this, I'm on board with the rules in this course, including things about academic dishonesty. And then just one other thing is, a real challenge is in online courses, because unless you make all your quizzes and tests open book, which is one way you could go, I haven't wanted to go that way, so I do have quizzes in which I tell people, and I make it really clear, this has to be your own work. But two things, in addition to the fact that they can take a quiz more than once, the way I have it set up, I also started last semester making the first item be an informational item on every quiz. And it basically is, the first 2 or 3 quizzes include a photograph of me saying, reminder, this needs to be your own work, don't forget, and, if the person can look at me and still be like, well, screw this, I'm going to cheat anyway, then there's nothing I can do.
Right.
But then I also get a little silly with it later, like after they've seen 2 or 3 pictures of me, quiz 4 has, a picture of my dog telling you not to cheat, or, things like that, so that they're not seeing the same thing, so that they don't get inured to it. So I don't know if it has an effect, but it's a way that I try to get it less distance and more sort of, hey, don't cheat in my class.
Right. The online thing is huge, because you have this whole idea of unauthorized group work. And a lot of times that happens. And so part of this introductory biology class is we do these online quizzes that are done through a bioportal. And you can see the time signature in which they've been submitted. And so you look at 250 students, and you'll always see the same cluster of students submitting at the same time throughout the 25 quizzes that are given. And then you'll see that one person that wasn't with the group, and you'll look at the grade, and it's gone down. And so, once again, I have no proof for it, but things like that might actually help a little bit.
I was just going to ask if that constitutes any sort of evidence.
I don't know, and that's one of those things is, if I were to present that to the dean, I'm not sure, as a scientist, I don't know if that's, from a scientific view, I wouldn't be able to say, well, looking at that objectively, that doesn't really, that's just correlative. But there's a lot of subjectiveness in academic honesty.
I know a lot of people really struggle with group work, and if you want to speak to some of your assessment measures, or strategies to prevent that collective sharing.
I think that's what was talked about last. Chris, is that right? That is a lot of what I do, and I really underscore, yeah, you have 20 minutes to do this online quiz, but make sure you're not doing it with friends, you're not opening the book, this and that. And I haven't come up with a good solution. I'm just kind of figuring my way through it too, and I don't know if there is a silver bullet. So
I find it's really baffling too, because you mentioned that there are collaborative components to lab work and
right. And you don't want to discourage that. That's the one thing. So it's
so
this fine.
You can collaborate on this, but now you have to do your own work.
And and I try to say you can collaborate on collecting data. You can collaborate about discussing ideas. Right? Because that's what scientists do. And you find that most of science happens not at the bench, but in that casual conversation over lunch or something. You find that's actually how a lot of science gets done. But the actual writing, the actual synthesizing what those ideas mean, really need to be on an individual level. And I try to underscore that. Whether it works or not, I'm not sure.
This question goes back to some of those examples of dishonesty you gave at the beginning of your presentation. And I started thinking about universities like Stout, where one of the things that we pride ourselves on are all those partnerships that we have with industry and different companies. And I would love to hear your thoughts about how we can navigate that and still maintain our independence as researchers in an economy that forces us to look outside of our state for funding.
Well, that's a great question. That is a great question. Because you always say, well, if you're in academic research, you need to keep this high level of integrity. But when you go into the workforce, do you really need to? But there's one thing about STEM that may not apply to all fields, and it has to do with basically, especially when you're talking about biotechnology, you're talking about pharmaceutical research. At the end, there's a human impact. Health. You're talking about drug trials. Pharmaceutical companies, FDA is constantly coming in and saying, we're pulling the drug. We went back and looked through your records. You didn't keep your data correctly. You've misinterpreted. You've actually oppressed some of the data. You've actually hidden some of the data. And the FDA can actually come in and say, no, you can't do that. So, you're finding that these code of ethics need to be in place in many pharmaceutical biotechnology. They do really have to maintain that because there's a financial, if the FDA comes in and pulls a drug, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that are pulled, And so that's it. If you're thinking about engineering, biomedical engineering, MRIs, CAT scans, if you're designing your CAT scan or MRI with lasers and, you know what, it's running a little hotter than it is, but you know what, it's fine. Well, if you find out that those lasers that are going into doing the MRIs are actually having physiological problems, they're actually causing physiological problems with patients, that is a huge issue. Even agricultural engineering, genetic engineering, there's a chance that there will be a direct human impact. I'm not sure if that's all, if agricultural engineering, you think about, you're producing equipment, you're designing engines, well, if it catches on fire because there's obviously an issue, so all these things kind of play into it. Whether that is enough to keep things ethical, I'm not sure. But there is, at least we hope, in a lot of these STEM regulated fields are regulated by governmental institutions. Anything that deals with human subjects, highly regulated. Anything that deals with, GMOs, at least especially in Europe, these are genetically modified organisms, that are going into the food chain. Those are highly regulated. So there is, but it depends on the field. That's the problem. So now I do have to say, especially for startups, biotechnology startups, they depend highly on federal funds. They have these small business research grants, which really kind of link academic sector to industry. Those really are subject to peer review and a lot of these other things. So there's an expectation that the integrity is there, probably much more than other facets. So
the whole issue of academic integrity is obviously very relevant and important with this group, but it also goes on into even in the workplace. How are they making their decisions in the workplace? Mm-hmm. Because I know of many people in different organizations where they run into ethical decision-making, integrity things, and they're trying to have integrity. They're trying to do what is right, but often their managers or others are saying, nope, we got to move. We don't have enough time. We can't deal with it. So what if it's running hot and it starts a fire somewhere? Well, it's just got to go. We'll deal with that later.
And that's actually what a lot of this responsible conduct of research training really talks about. Whistleblower protections. Mm-hmm. What is, if you're going to be, there are risks being a whistleblower. A lot of times whistleblowers are subordinates. They're the ones that are at the lower level. And like even the case, like you said, of Mark Hauser, is it? The Korean scientist, it was a former technician. Even the MIT professor, it was a I think it was a postdoc or someone like that. So how do you combat that? And if you're going to lose your job, and you actually want to talk about, it's a huge issue. And I think as educators, I think it's important for us to really tell our students the risks and the costs associated with those type of things, but also what your rights are. Especially as federal agencies are really kind of making sure that whistleblowers are being protected. And so there's a case in Madison that just happened where a postdoc accused of his PI of misconduct, scientific misconduct. And it came out that the department really asked him to resign, but
Asked whom to resign?
The postdoc that was charging his PI. And it was later found out that as he was handing in his resignation papers, they were at a meeting actually talking about his firing. And so this has actually gone all the way up to this academic integrity office and how to deal with it. And was it, a true case of a whistleblower being punished, or was it something that what the university was saying, and this happened at Madison, that it was really kind of a poor, he wasn't a contributor to the group, and he was really causing problems for the group, and there really wasn't anything to really worry about. So it's one of those things, no black and white side to it, and these are issues. You're going to see this constantly, that workers are going to be faced where they are dealing with managers or superiors that say, don't worry about it. And that's not okay in the large picture.
We have about time for a break. There is still coffee and snacks just outside the room. Again, the restrooms are just outside the hall. We have a fairly small group today, but we do have a panel presentation. I think we can make it, a kind of a continuation. Our intention was to have folks from different disciplinary perspectives and from administrative perspectives provide some insight and their thoughts. And we'll go with that. And those of you that are still here, feel free to jump into the conversation and share your thoughts as well. And we'll make it an ongoing conversation. So please take about a 15-minute break while we set up our table and enjoy some coffee. And thank you, Anita.
Oh, no problem.